Welcome back to Burnout Banter. Today we're unpacking the history, the myth, and the modern impact of the 40-hour work week, a standard many of us still cling to, even if we're regularly clocking more than that. From grueling 100-hour work weeks in the 1800s to Henry Ford's productivity experiments in the 1920s, we'll explore how the 40-hour work week came to be, and more importantly, why it's no longer working for so many, especially in the deadline-driven AEC industry. So whether you're trying to reclaim your time, questioning why work still looks like it did a century ago, or leading a team that's burning the candle at both ends, this episode is for you. Let's talk about what needs to change and what already is. Hey everybody, my name is Rachelle,
I'm Jeff.
and this is Burnout Banter. Before we jump into today's episode, remember to subscribe to the podcast on Spotify, Amazon, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or wherever you listen so that you can stay up to date with the latest banter.
I'm excited to go back into the 1800s.
I'm excited that you're excited because I really like history. And so it was really hard for me to cut this down to not be like an hour-long history lesson. But yeah, we're going to take it way back. But
Seems
before
like
we do
seems
that,
like many other podcasts that do history lessons. We're finally jumping on the trend.
oh, I have a whole list. History podcasts were my entry into podcast listening. So yeah, special place in my heart for those. Before we jump in, question for you, Jeff. What do you think is the top ranking or most important factor for most people when they're weighing their career opportunities?
Ooh, that's a doozy of a question. I would say money.
Salary is actually tied with work-life balance for about 73% of people in a 2019 study. I would have been very interested to see the 2025 version of this post-COVID, but I couldn't find it. So still, that is crazy. Flexible work options, work schedules, and meaningful work followed up in the top five considerations for people when they're
Okay, so
thinking about
salary
working.
and work-life balance were tied for the top.
Yes,
Okay, yes, I
yes.
got it right. I, I, my Family Feud thing turning around and giving me some points up at the top.
The little counter is rolling. 1,000 points for Jeff. We could just treat this whole thing as some trivia. That'll be interesting as well. Are you ready
I'm
to
ready. Let's see if I can keep it rolling.
All right. Okay. How many hours a week do you think people were working during the Industrial Revolution? I
I think
might
it's
have let this slip in the intro.
I think it's a lot. I think if you look in China and look at how much people are working there right now, it probably mirrors it pretty closely.
Ooh, I like that, bringing in the culture. Uh, probably.
And it was
So
probably there was probably a lot of children too in the Industrial Revolution in the United States.
there were some questionable child labor practices as well. But yeah, people were working like 80 to 100-hour weeks around 1817, the early 1800s, which is wild.
So were
But
they
it
all lawyers?
factory workers,
Oh,
unfortunately, not making a whole lot of money. Probably not in the best conditions either. People were just being treated very poorly all around, right?
yep. Who Carnegie was big in the Industrial Revolution, right?
I think so.
Yeah, I've heard some horror stories about how Carnegie treated people. And if you
And
tried to fight for any better working conditions, he just fired everybody and hired new people.
because people were hungry,
Yeah,
right? Like there was always someone to take your place, which is a terrible place to be in as an employee, but a great place to be in as an employer.
yeah. Taking
Uh,
major advantage of people.
yeah, exactly. Which is why it took like 70 years or 80 years for anyone to pass a law mandating an 8-hour workday. So Illinois is the first state to do this in the US. And crazy, who could have thought? All of the employers said no and refused to cooperate. So guess what happened?
All the employers refused to cooperate?
Yes,
Did the
all the
employees want
parties. The employees rioted,
it? Okay.
right? They went on strike. And so there's a big worker strike in Chicago that resulted in the Haymarket riot. So basically, what happened is someone threw a bomb, and a lot of people got hurt, including the cops. So things did not go well. That legislation failed. The 8-hour workday didn't go anywhere. And then it took another 40 years for us to make any progress toward controlling our work week. So
Was it unions, do you think, that led the charge of trying to get better working conditions for people? Was that kind of,
I didn't do a whole lot of research into the union part of this, and I should have, but I would imagine, yes, it was the National Labor Board who organized this, I believe. And we're lobbying for control over hours and better pay and all that good stuff that, people care about, but companies don't. So, but violence never really works out in favor of anyone, so they
when was
didn't.
the Haymaker, Haymarket riot?
That was in 1886.
Okay.
Yeah. So then someone whose name is probably pretty familiar to all of our listeners, Henry Ford, came around and is actually the one who popularized the 40-hour work week. And you might know this, but he did it in 1926 after realizing that working more only yielded a very small increase in productivity, and it actually resulted in a lot of errors and mistakes and accidents, which when you're assembling vehicles is not great because those accidents usually lead to bodily harm, which puts your workers out of commission, which is very expensive.
They probably didn't have quite the robust recall system that they do now for cars.
Not so much, I don't think. That would come later. According to Culture Amp, Ford announced he would pay each worker $5 per 8-hour workday, which does not sound like a lot, but in 1926 was bank, because it was actually nearly double what the average auto worker was making at the time. And because he did this, other manufacturers and companies had to follow suit. And they also saw that his new policy was boosting productivity and it fostered a lot of loyalty and pride among his employees. So he led by example and things got better for everyone, which is fantastic.
Yeah, in a lot of ways.
Yeah. How long do you think it took after 1926 for the 40-hour work week to actually become law?
Maybe the 60s? I don't know.
Oh, not quite that far. We weren't
Okay,
that bad. It took
okay.
another decade or so. It's 1938. So yeah, it was finally enshrined in US law, except there are a lot of loopholes, right? Most employees in the US actually work more than 40 hours a week. Americans tend to work 7-ish hours more than that, 47 hours a week. And in AEC, because we're so project driven and deadline driven, and we have like field work that then requires us to go back to the office and do stuff as well, it's really, really hard to maintain the 40-hour week.
Yeah, I can tell you that from 25 years of experience.
That was actually going to be my next question to you, Jeff, is what has been your experience? Like, is the 40-hour work week effective? Is it real? Is it a myth?
Well, I think there are a lot of people who do work 40 hours a week.
Good for
Um,
them.
I do think the average is probably closer to 45. You said 47. I think there are some horror stories, or used to be horror stories, much worse than it is now. So maybe people are realizing in our industry that people aren't quite as effective or productive if they're working 50 or 60 hours a week, but I know it happens. I have clients who do it on the regular. And trying to get them to change that is very difficult.
It is like that culture is ingrained. Hustle culture has really impacted this, and that could be a whole episode on its own. I would say, like, my experience has been that the 40-hour work week 1000% does not exist. I'm almost always working more. There are occasions where I'm working less, but I'm never working an 8-hour day. And it always seems to average out. Like if I do have an early day, then I pay for it with a late day afterward. Or if I have like a decent, like a 42-hour week, then I pay for it with a 50-hour week. So it seems to average out in my experience as a marketer. And again, it's mostly because of those deadlines. Like we had a lull, but now we've got 7 pursuits and things are crazy.
Deadlines definitely drive an increase in people's time. And I don't, no matter how well you plan, it doesn't seem to help you avoid that crunch at the end. And I think, as an electrical engineer, a lot of what we're doing at the end of a project relies on everybody else, much like for you all, right? You're waiting on other people to do their thing. And so there's only so much you can get done ahead of time without waiting on other people to get you information. And if they're behind, it very quickly makes you behind.
Right. There's a lot of really complex relationships within AEC as well that make it difficult. It's a really good point.
One thing that was interesting when you were talking about the history of all this, I had the question of, if you're assembling something or, doing something over and over again, without putting a whole lot of thought into it, is that different than like a thinking type job or that's more common today, right? Where it's very thought driven and less manufacturing driven. And I get that Ford determined that people were not as productive as they continued to work longer hours, which I would agree with, just because you get tired and you can't pay attention to what you're doing. But I don't know, just something that popped into my head if there's a difference. What do you think?
Oh, 1000%. This is a conversation I've been having or trying to have on LinkedIn actually for a couple of years now, that the 40-hour work week was not designed for knowledge workers, which is what we all are, right? Because yeah, your brain is not a computer. It's not constantly doing like these rote tasks. It can't just do things on repeat over and over and over again. We have to be thinking and innovating and creating and making connections. And we're not designed as human beings to be able to do that for 8 hours straight, or even to do it with, 15 or 30-minute breaks in between. We're not supposed to be on like that. We just physically can't do it. So I absolutely believe like you're spot on. This was designed for assembly lines and it worked for those, but it was not designed for knowledge work. And
And do you think
the
that like be doing something physical, like farming or mining or whatever, right? Like your body wears down after a set amount of time, but also your mind wears down.
exactly, exactly. And your body wears down at a different rate than your brain wears down. Like,
Yeah.
but yeah, we're 1000%. There's research showing that that's in fact true. Like work productivity studies are absolutely showing that we aren't fully productive for 8 hours a day. In fact, more than half of our time is actually not productive. It is meetings or emails or admin tasks or dealing with interruptions, right? Which you can argue are productive, but they're not like the
Hmm.
project work or that deadline driven work, right? Like we do have to get into the meetings, we do have to answer those emails. Like there are things that need to get done,
Do
but
we?
they're not the important things. They're not the meat of what we're supposed to be doing.
I
Jeff
would
is
argue
nodding for anybody listening out there.
a lot of
Jeff is
meetings that we sit
cracking
in,
up.
we do not need to be in,
At least half of my meetings could
at
just be
least.
email
Yeah. And I
or
think the use of meetings has kind of gotten away from people where it used to be like you would go out and do your job and now you come together in a meeting to like decide something and keep going forward. And now we're almost trying to like do our job in a meeting, which is completely counterproductive.
well, that's really interesting. Can you actually say more about that?
Well, I think you used to, right? In order to, what was the reason for having a meeting, right? It was I've hit a point where I can't make this decision on my own or I need guidance from somebody else. So let's have a meeting and we'll discuss it and then we'll make a decision and move forward. And I don't feel like that's what we do most of the time. It's very like, oh, we're doing this and we did this. And so there's no real decisions being made. It's more we're summarizing like what we've been doing or what we're going to do. And I don't know that a lot of people benefit from that kind of a conversation, especially if it doesn't apply to you and what you're doing.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. I agree with that. The number of meetings I have that are prepping for the next meeting is wild to me. Can we not just do it in that meeting? Even like proposal wise, like we're gonna have a kickoff meeting where like the most essential people are in here and we're talking about this, but then we might need to have separate meetings to talk about specific pieces of content or, and like you said, yeah, we're trying to knock that out at the same time when we probably all need to individually go off and like think about it.
Well, or the other thing that's happening, right, is because nobody has any time to do their actual work, we're having meetings to make sure that people are doing their work, which is taking away from people's ability to do their work. So it's almost become this like check-in thing that, I don't trust that you're going to get your stuff done. So I'm going to have a meeting and instead of, just people going away doing their work and then we come together, we make a decision, we keep going.
I wonder if that's gotten worse post-COVID as well, like with the increase in remote work, this we need to see you working.
No, it was terrible before, it's terrible now. I can't tell you how many meetings I sat in that before COVID, where you've got 20 people that all drove to the architect's office to sit in a room together, and you don't even have your stuff talked about for 99% of the meeting.
That
So
sounds
it was
miserable.
terrible then, and it's terrible now.
So it's still broken,
Yes.
still
But I
broken.
think the idea of being in the office is like the easy button of, oh, well, if we're all in the office, we'll talk to each other and we'll figure this out. And it's like, no, you didn't have it figured out before. You don't have it figured out now. And you're not really resolving the root issue that's causing the problems. So the problem is going to continue whether we're all together or not.
It wasn't really better beforehand. We just want to
It wasn't,
remember
we've
it
just
that way.
forgotten.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm not crazy. It was
No,
terrible before.
it was. Probably even worse.
God, I just meetings on their own could probably also be another episode. They're
Uh,
expensive.
Meeting burnout would be a huge topic.
Meeting burnout, done. We'll do that one.
Okay.
But yeah, back to productivity studies, right? So research does say like brief interruptions can be good for your creativity, like little brain breaks. But the 8 hour, like working more than 8 hours is definitely detrimental to employee health and productivity, which in turn is actually detrimental to your company, right? Like if your employees are not being productive or they're making mistakes and having to rework things, like that's costing you money. So
How long do you think? Okay, now it's my turn to ask a question. How long do you think a typical person can concentrate on something without needing a break before their productivity dips?
I feel like I can't go more than an hour without needing to break away from what I'm doing.
Yeah, it's about an hour and a half, and you need to build up to it. And I would say as we get younger people into the workforce, it is probably nowhere near an hour and a half as kids' ability to concentrate and focus on something.
Not even just kids, like I have different thinking patterns with new technology, right? Like I intentionally limit social media use, but I notice when I use it more, you get like that instant gratification or like you're hopping between things. It's harder to focus for longer periods of time. So I think kids are more susceptible to it, but everyone is kind of susceptible to that short attention span.
Yeah, so an hour and a half is about it. If you're practiced and like actually take the time to be intentional about focusing, no matter how good you are at it, that is about as long as you can last without needing a break.
That is crazy.
And yeah, we're expected to sit there for 8 hours and be productive.
Absolutely
Although,
not.
although I would guess the 40-hour work week law had breaks to it, which we all completely ignore as well.
It's funny you say that. It reminds me of a story. One of my friends got a government job and because, federal law has to take like a 15-minute break every 2 hours and then an hour for lunch. And they were really stressing over these 15-minute breaks every 2 hours. And they're like, when do you take your 15 minutes? And I just started laughing because I was like, I don't get 15 minutes on top of an hour-long lunch. I barely get the hour-long lunch, like unless I really choose to block it off. And that's still 2 hours, right? Like a
Yeah, and we
break from,
probably get it in some way, especially if I think if we're really busy, we tend to just kind of blast through that, but most find a way to go take a break. It just may not be quite as intentional as it needs to be. Like if I go talk to somebody else in the office about work for 15 minutes, I'm really not taking a break, right? Even though I got up and wasn't being productive at my desk.
but you've task switched. So it's kind of a little mental break. Kind
Yeah, but
of.
it's not the like get away from this, not focus at all that you need to go back in and engage your focus mode.
Right. That like full refresh
Yeah. You
for
be
sure.
quiet, listen to music, go for a walk.
That sounds nice. Can we do that?
Sure, you can.
I feel like I don't have time for those
Your
things. I
dog,
try to squish them all in. My dogs would appreciate more walks.
isn't their toy pile an indication of they need a walk or they need a break? Or that you need a
It
break?
is. It is. There are no toys around my desk today, which means we did good with our breaks. That's not usually the case. So I feel like we've hit on a lot of the negatives of the 40-hour work week. I do want to just acknowledge that there are some positives. Can you think of any? Like pros?
I mean, there's routine built into that, right? Like we
For
know when
sure.
we're supposed to be at work or when we're supposed to be working. I think our mind and body appreciates that.
The anxious person in me does appreciate knowing when I need to sign on and when I'm allowed to sign off.
Yeah.
Routine is very helpful. For sure. Definitely a pro. Anything else?
Just people being together or like knowing when I was working on we're doing intern onboarding tomorrow. I have two interns starting, and just the difference in time zone between Arizona and Denver was really making a mess of me trying to like coordinate schedules so that like we could be doing things at the same time. So I would think having fixed periods of times where you're all together and know that you're going to be working is a good thing. It can be quite challenging if you don't know when somebody's working or when they're going to be online and you need something.
For sure. Yeah. That was another one that I could think of too, is that
The,
communication is a little bit easier.
the nine
Wild,
to
but
five
only an
doesn't
hour
resolve
difference.
the 9 to 5 doesn't resolve the time zone difference thing. And
Not
I
so
know
much.
I have friends who like work with East Coast companies and they have people at like 5 or 6 in the morning hitting them up for things when they're in Denver. So I say turnabout's fair play. You just get to hit them up in the evening with things.
Yeah, we could just be flexible, right? I think we'll all be okay. But having those like dedicated overlaps are is
Yeah,
very
core
helpful.
hours, right?
4 hours, for sure. We are starting to hit on the next section of the episode. Do we want to jump ahead?
Sure.
Awesome. So we've decided the 40-hour work week is broken. It served a purpose. It was good when it started. Work has evolved, so the work week needs to evolve.
I
If the
guess
40-hour work week, go ahead.
I don't know that working 40 hours a week is broken. I just think the way that we work is broken.
Ooh, interesting.
I think we get so wrapped up in like meetings and the unproductive time that we don't have time to actually do our jobs. And so then we end up having when people aren't bothering us. If I'm online at 9 o'clock at night, I'm not getting any emails and I can actually be productive. Why can't we create that time for ourselves in the day so that we don't have to do it at 9 o'clock at night? So
Right.
yeah, I'm with you. Like I don't need like, oh, if you work 38 hours or 40 hours or 42 hours, like who cares? It's more important to get your job done and not focus so much on the time. But I do think we need to make better use of our time. And
I
when
1000% agree.
and when we don't, that's when we burn out, right? Because we are having to work crazy hours just to get our job done.
Exactly. I think also having like time targets instead of like productivity targets contributes to burnout as well. Like we're either trying to fill this time or trying to squish as much as we can into this time, and there's kind of like a moving target on what is productive. Like, am I meeting this deadline and then I've done my job, or do I have to meet all seven of them this week and that's my job is done? There's just like a lot of variability to me, like ambiguity when you're time driven and not deadline driven or project driven. I know that's a really confusing way to phrase this because we are a deadline and project driven industry. But like if you have five projects on your plates and you're just trying to do as much of all of them as you possibly can within your 40-hour work week instead of looking at your assignments and thinking like, okay, this is priority one, two, and three for this week. This is four, five, and six for next week. And like when you hit those, you know you've done what you need to do and you can feel good about signing off. Right? Instead of like, well, I've done one, two, and three, but I still have four, five, and six. And even though I've done like 38 hours, I could probably just knock those out right now just in case.
And 7, 8, 9, 10, up to
Yeah.
100 to
Yeah,
200
it
to
never
500.
ends.
Yeah, it never ends.
Exactly. Exactly. So I kind of wanted to talk through like some more alternatives.
I'm up for alternatives.
I love alternatives. That's my pitch is let's be productivity based and not time based. But I figured we could look at some research back ones that have been trialed or are currently being trialed by companies and are working out really well.
Mine, before you do that, would be to create time to focus within our day and time to have meetings within our day and just be really intentional and respectful of each other in that way, right? Because even if I say I'm going to block out 9 to 10:30 to have time and everybody else ignores that and just throws meetings into my calendar, that can be, it sidesteps the whole benefit of having that focus time. So I think the company has to support that in order for people to be successful doing something like that.
I totally agree. I have started using the focus time function in my calendar, so it like blocks that time so people can't schedule. The problem is that people still message me throughout that time, and I turn my notifications off, but I like mentally can't help checking. And it's really frustrating to me.
Just
Like,
pretend you're
could
on
you
an
have
airplane,
waited?
Rachelle.
I know it's a me thing, but could you not have waited like just 30 minutes? I do really short blocks.
Well, I think if people knew, maybe if people know that that's what you're doing and they know you'll be available in 30 minutes, then they will wait. If they don't know when you're going to be available, then they don't wait.
That's fair. It does pop up. My status changes literally
Does it
like,
tell them when you're going to be reavailable? Yeah,
yeah, yeah. I don't know what else to do.
ignore it.
The assumption is like, we'll send the message and she'll get to it when she gets to it, I assume, and that's totally fair. I should be ignoring in my focus time anything else, but sometimes things come through and they're time sensitive and the marketer and me just can't handle missing things. What if?
Oh,
Uh,
fear. Oh, fear.
Fear is the worst. So those are mine and Jeff's. I want productivity based, and he wants culture shift to focus time. Neither one of those is an option in the few that I found that are being tested out. And there are many, many more. These were just three I found very interesting.
I do know of companies that do the maker versus manager time and be very intentional about it, and it does work quite well.
Excellent. That's
But the whole
everyone.
company has to be on board with it, and clients, they message that out to clients, right? Like, hey, we're having a focus day. We'll get back to you when we're done.
That's phenomenal. I love that. Culture shifts, also impossibly hard, but not impossible.
Not impossible.
They just take a lot of work. They can be done on large scales. So the first alternate to the 40-hour work week that I found was actually trialed by an entire country. So shout out to Iceland. This actually made the news a couple years ago, so you might be familiar with this one as well. But Iceland trialed two different reduced work week pilots, and they found overwhelmingly positive results. Both employees and employers were reporting increased productivity and well-being. So they cut down on time spent actually physically present at your job.
What were
So
the two options? Or what did they trial?
they trialed, there were two different things that I was looking at, and one of them cut down the actual hours worked, and one of them was like a 410 situation. But this one, they cut the hours. So they moved to a 35-hour work week. It was originally proposed several years before and got shut down. So they reduced working hours by between 1 and 4 hours per week. So we didn't drop all the way down to 35, but we did cut out close to half a day in some of them.
1 hour,
And it
I'm not.
depended,
1 hour, I'm not buying.
I'm not buying that
It doesn't move the
either.
needle much for me.
No,
I
no.
always, it's interesting on the engineering side of our industry. Most engineering firms do the 3 9s and a 4 so that you get a half day on Friday.
Oh,
And to me, having to go in or work for the 4 hours kind of ends that. I'd much rather have like either it's every Friday off or every other Friday off or something like that where you're not having to log in and be, you know, present with work. I don't know, just not a fan.
I agree. I don't like having to shift that time. Like we already established that 8 hours a day is almost too much for a knowledge worker now, and you're shifting that time to an extra half hour, hour during the week. So you're not actually doing
Which really only
anything.
buys you a half a day off. If
Yeah,
the whole day, I might look at it very differently, but a half a day, especially when we were driving into the office, like I still have to drive all the way to the office and drive home, and now I'm working half the time. And
exactly.
yeah, it's just, and most of the time, that's again when people leave you alone. It's on Friday afternoon because everybody knows you're not working. So how many people end up working on Friday afternoon? A lot.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah, I fully agree with that too. I do appreciate that it is an attempt giving time back to employees, but I think there's a lot of holes in it. And something I thought was really interesting about the Iceland pilots is that they were different for different industries and workplaces. Like schools had rotating schedules, but in police stations, they had like staggered schedules so that they had different people in at different times, but everything was always covered. So they didn't like try to shove a one size fits all into everything. They recognize that different workers have different responsibilities and different requirements. And they found within the parameters of the pilot, like ways to reduce total hours for all of them. So they eventually got to reducing by a full day a week, or sorry, 8 hours over 2 weeks. So about half a day. And it works for them. So maybe something we can all start considering, getting a little creative. Maybe asking your people, like obviously that is not gonna work for you to add an hour, throughout the week and then take half of Friday off because that's your focus time. But maybe something else would.
Yeah, there are places that do the 410s, and I think people really like that. Again, right? You're maybe losing the company is probably losing some productivity by having people work the 10 hours in any given day, but it's probably shifting away from the 40 hours in some way that allows people to have a little more time off.
I did see while I was researching this, and it didn't make it into the episode, but now it is, did make it into the outline. But there was a Time article about the most productive countries, and I believe it was Luxembourg was the most productive, and they worked the least hours a week. It was like 29 total hours was their average, and they were more productive than any other country in the world.
Well, I mean, if you think about it, how much more productive would you be knowing that you have less time and you get more time off if you get all your stuff done? I'd be a lot more productive. If I could get my job done in 35 hours and give myself 5 hours off, you better believe I'd probably get my job done in 35 hours. But if I know I get my job done in 35 hours and now I have to fill 5 hours of time, yeah, I'm gonna slow down and stretch it out a little bit so that I don't have to do that.
That's a whole other psychological phenomenon where if you give someone like an hour-long task, but you give them 4 hours to do it, they will find a way to make it take 4 hours.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
Because
yeah, I
because you don't want to, I mean, I don't want to be sitting here with nothing to do,
exactly.
having to figure out what I'm going to put on my timesheet.
Exactly. I feel like that's another vote for productivity-based targets and not time-based targets.
Yes, for sure.
I've solved the problem, Jeff. We all just need to switch to my idea.
I'm ready. I have another idea.
Bring it
Because
on.
works in healthcare, and so I'm just ready to roll in another electrical engineer when I leave at 5 o'clock and have them take the first night shift and then have somebody else come in and take the morning, the early morning shift. Think about how much work we could get done. And I would never have to work any extra because it's just happening all the time.
The thought of being the night shift knowledge worker sounds awful to me because I'm a day person. But I know so many people who are not, and they get really frustrated with office, like normal office hours, because that's like they naturally want to wake up around 11 o'clock in the morning or so, or they're super productive at like 2 o'clock in the morning. They would probably love that shift.
Yeah.
All right, I'm down. I want everyone to take this opportunity to write in and give us your craziest idea as an alternative to the 40-hour work week. We'll pitch some of them on our LinkedIn, see how it goes.
Have you ever read the book, The 4 Hour Work Week?
I have and I hated it.
Yeah, it's a vote for your productivity thinking, but I feel like it's a bit much.
I, if Books Could Kill has a fantastic episode on the 4-hour work week. They say it so much better than I can, but I think it's a lot of crock. I tried reading that when I first started consulting because I was burnt out, of course, and was looking for, I'm owning my life now. I'm a business owner. I'm gonna take control and not work 40 hours and I'm gonna have a life for once and thought that would be my manual to do that and was incredibly disappointed.
Well, the other thing that's a bit off topic with this, but if we did a better job of conveying our value to owners and stuff, then you wouldn't have to take on so much work to make ends meet, which I think is also a huge problem. But that's a whole nother topic as well. So
I feel like the commodization of the industry would fit well within that topic. Like it seems, at least in my experience on the marketing side, like so much has become a race to the bottom.
yeah.
Like we're not quals based necessarily anymore. We're best price, which has somehow swung back to lowest price. And it's just driving all of us. It's not good for anybody.
Nope. Well, we said we were going to make this short, but we didn't do a very good job of that.
We didn't. I was just going to ask if you have final thoughts so we can squeeze in our burning question because we have a leftover from Southern Regional
I
Conference that
I
lined
say we
up
go for, I say we go for
perfectly.
the burning question.
And now it's time for burning questions.
Perfect. All right. So one of our listeners from our live episode set us up perfectly and asked, how do you get your employer to respect the boundaries of a 40-hour work week and not have the expectation to work at 150% all the time? Jeff, I know you have a really great story for this one
I do.
about one of your coaching clients that was burnt out and super frustrated and just like stopped responding to things.
Oh, right.
I feel like that's
Yes. I
the
mean,
model for this.
they did, and they did have a big change on the culture of the company, but it was done more from the perspective of this was not coaching advice. Screw this. I'm not doing it anymore, and they can fire me if they want to, which is there's some heavy fear stuff going on there, but the better way would have been to have a conversation about it and talk through like, this is the impact. Again, you talk all the time about having data in some way, data ties your productivity so that they see the impact that the 150% work is having on you. But if they're working all the time, there's probably not much you're going to do to change it.
Yes, fair. Not the answer we probably wanted. I feel like this was because it was a marketing conference. This is definitely a marketer. So my thinking was that they probably had slipped down the very slippery slope of I stayed late. one time to get a proposal that went off the rails out the door, and that has now veered into that's just how it is territory, and it's now the baseline expectation of the team, of the firm. And so it's gotten really scary to return to a normal, like, no, I'm not going to save the day. I'm not going to stay late. I'm not going to work the weekend. And there's just like this increased pressure to stay at that 150%. So like we might start to feel like we're quiet quitting if we try to return to the 40-hour week.
Yeah,
So I think you're right. There's
that
fear.
in my mind was the quiet quitting, right? And that's essentially what that person did. Now, it ended up having a positive outcome, but I would guess in a lot more cases than not, it wouldn't.
Right,
So
right.
I think the key thing to do is to be like, to go to them and say, this is what I've been doing, maybe take some ownership as to what led you down the path, like I wanted to jump in and help or whatever, and now it's become this slippery slope that I'm having a hard time getting off of. But here's my boundary. I'm not willing to do this anymore. And if that means you want to move on from me, I guess that means you need to move on from me. But if the company's not going to change that culture, that's probably what's best for you anyways. But it's having that conversation, right? And that's the freedom-based approach to that is let's talk through it. You may not get the answer that you want, but you'll feel better because yourself instead of continuing to feel trampled on,
Agreed. I think it all comes back to having that scary conversation. There's
which is
really,
which is only scary because we make it scary.
I know, but it's so easy to make it scary,
Yes, it is.
especially for anxious people.
And I think when you get into management, I don't think most people realize the impact that their behavior is having on their staff. If I'm working extra because I choose to, the perception is that's what's required to move up into this new job. And if I want to move up, I now have to work this extra. And that may not be true, right? But people are picking up on what's doing, not what they're saying. And so I don't even know that most managers have that level of clarity that, wow, look at the message I'm sending to my staff. And they may be burned out and doing the exact same thing that this person's doing, and they wish somebody would speak up and help them out too.
Probably. I can think of many managers who set that example for me. I feel like I don't really manage, but I feel like I've been that team member before too. It's like on too much, especially because it's so easy. And Jeff, you pointed this out before we started recording, but it's so easy when we're connected all the time now to appear like you're online. Like I get up very early in the morning and I tend to check my Slack messages at like 5:30. And my intention is just to check them, right? Not to respond to them. It's just like mentally preparing for the day. But sometimes it's a really easy answer to someone and I fire it off. But then I give this appearance that I'm like online for 12 hours. And I don't think I'm pressuring anybody intentionally, but when you see that person who is seemingly like always there, maybe that is the vibe that I'm giving off.
The unintended consequence of that is,
Um,
yes, this is what you need to do if you want my job.
do as I say, not as I do.
And I think when you're constantly like checking your work email or checking Teams or checking Slack, like that is, especially when you think about burnout, right? That's little action, right? Of just like looking at something for 2 minutes is putting you back in work mode. It takes you 30 minutes to get back out of work mode. And so the times when I'm going to do this in air quotes, should be resting, you're now no longer resting. And so even if you're just checking something for 2 minutes, it's 30 minutes. And now it feels like you're doing it all the time and you're always working. And that's not good.
Nope.
So I think a lot of it comes down to having a conversation. How do you get them to respect your boundaries? You don't, but you can respect yourself and your boundaries, and that'll make a lot of difference.
Yeah, we can't control what others do or think or say, but we
No,
can control what we do think and say. So
Only we had that magic wand.
As soon as someone invents that magic wand, be the
Or the
first in
force.
line.
Or the force. Once we harness the force. We are in May, right? Star
Yeah.
Wars month.
It's passed a little bit, but that's okay.
Just pass. But we could still learn to harness the force.
Absolutely.
With a wave of the hand and get people to do whatever you want them
These are not the hours you want me to work.
to. Maybe we all just need to become professional hypnotists or something and hypnotize people.
Maybe. Any
I mean, you
other?
said to think outside the box. I'm thinking
I
outside.
did. I did. But I was gonna pull it back and see if there are any other practical things that we can do today without harnessing the energy of the universe.
I don't think so.
Can't think so either. This is what happens when Jeff and Rochelle record at the end of the workday in our 9th hour of work. We get a little loopy.
Our focus has disappeared.
It's toast. Well, in that case, friendly reminder to our listeners, if you have a burning question, you can email it to us at burnoutbanter@gmail.com. And please remember to like or subscribe to the podcast on Amazon, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or wherever you listen to make sure you never miss an episode.
All right.
We did it.
We did it. We'll see everybody next month.
See you all next month.
Bye.